As things get colder, a lot of people start to shift more towards music that's appropriate for the season. Now, I'm not talking about Christmas rap. I'm talking about cold weather rap. Welcome to Bar for Bar podcast, and this week I'm going to talk to you guys about cold weather / winter rap. So, right off the bat, it's, again, not limited to just Christmas rap, because honestly, Christmas rap can be kind of boring, but is more limited to rap that kind of emulates the sound of cold weather, if that makes sense. So when you listen to certain albums, you just get this feeling of being in a cold environment. Now, it's kind of weird to talk about it now, just because in California it's still like 75 degrees, but it's gonna quickly get cold again. So for me, what makes a cold weather rap album is, one, the sounds of it. Typically, you don't want to be listening to something that is very West Coast sounding, if that makes sense. So no Chronic to no Doggy Style, nothing like that, because those are very West Coast sounding albums, and those are sorts of albums that you would listen to when you're just kind of riding around and like with the top down. Like, those don't really lend themselves well to cold weather. If anything, they kind of make you feel bad about the cold weather, because you'd be sitting around shivering and you're just wishing that it was summer again. Because obviously there are definitely albums that are summer albums, and I think the majority of those tend to be West Coast albums. With cold weather / winter albums, they, for me, often tend to be more East Coast albums. And actually, I think all the ones that I've written down are actually East Coast albums. So, other than it just sounding like a winter album, it has to kind of have this, like, coldness to it. It's kind of a hard thing to explain, because it's just a feeling that you get rather than something that's just straight up told to you. And it's something that you really only, I guess, get to experience if you've really paid attention to the album. Although there are going to be some exceptions. But really the gist of it is that it's going to give you this feeling that you are somewhere cold. And given that I mentioned that most of it's going to be East Coast, I mean, East Coast during winter is real cold. So that makes a little bit more sense. I'm sure there are West Coast albums and other albums in general that fit that sort of fit under that umbrella of cold weather albums. But it's, to me, I don't really remember any of them. So don't get mad at me if I forget to mention your favorite cold weather album, because I'm sure there's a lot of them out there. So other than it just giving you this feeling of cold, it should also just, I don't know, the beats and the lyrics have to be fitting for cold weather. So the biggest example and the most well-known example that everyone would mention is going to be GZA's Liquid Swords. Now, you could make the argument that a lot of Wu-Tang albums are winter albums, and I would have to agree, because they have that sort of street feeling, if you know what I mean. And I don't mean like they're talking about being gangsters or anything, because Liquid Swords is about a story of a shogun or a samurai and all that. There's more to it. I'm going to have a discussion about Liquid Swords in a few weeks, so stay tuned for that. But Liquid Swords in general, like, the beats are very cold sounding, and I think even the setting of the album is during wintertime. And after listening to it hundreds of times, I can very easily imagine this being set in like Japan during winter, like maybe early winter when it's just barely starting to snow. It's like, and all like the kind of like winter / autumn, like early winter, late autumn. Like, that just, to me, is where I would put it. It's just a very cold feeling album, and I guess that's just one of the things that a very solid artist can do. Like, they can just put you in an environment that you have never experienced or ever will be in, because honestly, I don't know when I would ever be in Japan in the winter, especially given the travel restrictions currently. But it'd be cool to do it, and then just listen to Liquid Swords the entire time. Yeah, I'm gonna do that someday, I guess. But no, regardless, like the beats really set the scene, and I mean that's definitely attributed to RZA, because RZA is that type of person that will focus on the scene of a beat more so than just making a beat a lot of the times, especially when it's an album like Liquid Swords that is super conceptual, and it's not like super conceptual, you know what I mean? Like it's not gonna beat you over the head with its concepts and everything. It's gonna be more like this is a theme that is being carried on, and that's what they're going to be, you know, talking about and rapping about. So it's a lot more consistency, and that again is one of the things that attributes it to being a good cold weather album. It is very consistent. There's no song on here that is just strictly like super upbeat or happy and kind of West Coast feeling, like take the top down, roll the windows down, just blast it. Like this is something that you would be like in the car with your jacket on, the heat all the way up, and you're just listening to it because you got to go somewhere. Aside from Liquid Swords, I mean, like I mentioned, a lot of the Wu-Tang's discography and catalog can definitely be put into this sort of cold rap category. But like I mentioned, it's Liquid Swords especially that really like set the tone, I'd say. Moving on from that, the other one that I had was actually Illmatic. Now, Illmatic is kind of a stretch. I will have to say that. So, disclaimer, I guess. But to me, I feel like Illmatic is a very good depiction of New York. And in my mind, whenever I think of New York, I think of cold weather. So, just being able to put yourself in the mindset and the shoes of Nas at that time and just fully be immersed in 90s New York, like that to me just really sounds like, yo, this is kind of cold. And it also, like the coldness also just kind of comes from the way that Nas is rapping on this. Now, I've mentioned coldness in terms of lyrics now, and coldness doesn't necessarily have to just strictly be talking about cold things. Like, you don't have to talk about ice and snow and the wind. Like, obviously you can, and that makes sense too, but it's, to me, talking cold or being cold is kind of like being very blunt or kind of harsh with your lyrics and words. And Nas definitely has moments of that. And especially because he is a storyteller on a lot of that project, there's moments where it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of chilly. Like, you get chills. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely tracks on this. That is for a summertime sort of feel. I don't remember the track list, but I know there's one that's just straight up a summertime album or song. I probably should have pulled this track list. Anyways. But again, that is another East Coast rapper who brings in that sort of cold feeling. Carrying on that trend, Mobb Deep, The Infamous. Like, that one is definitely a cold album, and one of the few that one of the many that I throw on right around this time of year. Well, more technically after Halloween, but right around now. And The Infamous is a really solid East Coast album. And again, it's kind of has the same sort of attributes as Illmatic, where it really puts you in that sort of like mode, and that like it puts you in that mindset where you are in New York and it's just cold. And being that these are very, well, The Infamous more so, it's a very, I guess, kind of more gangster rap. I mean, gangster rap is kind of weird to say nowadays because it kind of has a whole lot of different subgenres under itself, but it is more of like that sort of street rap. And because it's street rap, you get to hear all these things that a lot of other rappers that no, I haven't really been part of are talking about, or at least they're talking about it in a different manner, and they're being very cold about it. It really just, anything that can kind of amplify the coldness that's around you, like, to me, is a really solid cold weather album or winter album. I know you could probably throw one of the Run Jules albums in there, but that to me is a bit of a stretch. And again, there are very many more than what I'm going to mention, so let me know, actually. Also, from there, we have Mad Villainy. Now, Mad Villainy is a weird one. Mad Villainy, to me, is a cold weather album just because of the weirdness. Like, it doesn't have that same sort of bump that a West Coast album would have, and it kinda has a little bit of boom bap that East Coast has, but it's also just weird as hell. So, to me, the reason it feels like a cold weather album is just its uniqueness, really. And I mean, at this time, I think Doom was in New York, so he kind of has that sort of feel. Again, it's not necessarily a fully winterized album or anything like that. It's not really meant for that, I'd say. It just happens that around this time of year, I listen to it a lot. Like, Mad Villainy is, like, well, it's one of my favorite albums, so that's kind of cheating too, just like Liquid Swords. But Mad Villainy is one of those albums that's just, it's weird. And it's, to me, there's a lot of moments where it's just cold as hell. Like, Fancy Clown is a cold song. Moving on to something that's just a little bit different, but kind of in the same realm and definitely a cold feeling project, is 808s and Heartbreak. This album, if I remember correctly, actually did come out around wintertime, or like late fall. So it already, just by default, has that vibe. But it's a very somber album. And this is coming off of Kanye's Graduation, which was a very happy and very high energy and uplifting album. Obviously, Kanye had suffered the loss of his mother at this point, so this album was kind of due to that fallout. So, yeah, it's going to be a little bit different from what he would normally do. But it's definitely not an album that you would typically listen to during the summer. It is, like, just the beats, and, I mean, the 808s, obviously, are just very cold feeling to me. Like, there's just so much to it that's, like, there's just, I don't know, it's very hard to explain 808s in terms of a winter album, other than it just being, like, the beats and shit are just, they're just cold. Like, and, I mean, obviously, lyrics, too. I mean, it's interesting because it's not kind of in the same realm as the other albums I mentioned. It's more in the realm of like a love lost sort of album. And sure, you can attribute that to winter because when the holidays come around, a lot of people who are like single and lonely, they want someone to be there with them. Like, they want some sort of companion. And if you're alone, obviously you're going to feel a lot of the same ways that Kanye feels. I think he also did break up with his girlfriend at the time during that too, so that definitely played a part. Other than that, I've also got The Cool by Lupe Fiasco. And this, again, kind of goes into the same sort of idea as The Infamous and Illmatic. Not necessarily setting you or putting you in the place that Lupe is rapping from, although he definitely can, because Chicago in the winter is very cold as well, but it's more of a street sort of feel. And this is obviously a little different from what Lupe would do nowadays and what he did on Food and Liquor, but it is one of those albums that's like, there are moments on it where it's very cold, especially in the skits. Like the Die, like I don't remember what song actually had the skit on it where someone was getting shot, but both the track The Cool and The Die are two very, just sonically, they feel like songs that are just super in your face, and just, I guess they have like a sort of shock value to them, or like at least that's what it feels like. And shock value in the sense where the beat is just wild compared to the rest of the album. Like the album's pretty smooth, and then boom, like, and it, it's, there's just a lot to The Cool that I feel would make it a very solid winter album. And I guess also releasing kind of around that time, like I think it released later, or like in October or something. So it makes some sense that it's a winter feeling album, because that was probably just the mood that he was in when he was writing it. The Cool to me is also just, it's a weird album in the sense that, again, it has moments where it could definitely be a more summer or springtime album, like with Superstar. Like that is a very, that doesn't really fit the winter theming as much. Sure, you can make it sound like it's a winter song, but, or make the argument for it, but I would say that it is more of a springtime sort of song. Like it's very happy comparatively. But then you have tracks like Hip Hop Saved My Life and Streets on Fire, which to me really make it feel more of a cold sort of album, even though Hip Hop Saved My Life is kind of like an uplifting track as well. Just kind of the scene that he paints for you is very, it starts off very cold, I'd say. And then just the last example that I have is Ka, and just Ka in general. Not even like a particular album really, because Ka just has that sort of sound that really lends itself well to cold weather, I'd say. I mean, I guess as far as examples go, Honor Killed the Samurai and Descendants of Cain, as well as Orpheus and the Sirens, I believe it was. Like those are, I mean, the latest projects that he dropped, but also they definitely have this feeling of loneliness to them. Obviously, like when I reviewed Descendants of Cain, he also released a video for basically the entire album. And from that video, you get a lot of depictions of New York life. Again, just like Nas and Mobb Deep. But it's in a different light because it's a little bit more recent than those two. It kind of touches on a lot of things that are happening more recently in just America in general. But it really does set this scene for a colder album. Like it makes you feel like you are again in New York and it is cold, and there's just so much to it that's like it's this kind of feeling of loneliness and emptiness, I'd say. Like there is just something amiss with what's happening. Like obviously, if you don't know Ka is a rapper who tends to lean himself more to beats that are a little more stripped back and typically with fewer drums. So basically all of his beats tend to be like very simplistic, but also not, if that makes sense. Like the beats sound very stripped back and very basic, but there's a lot of layering to them still. And that really allows him to pretty much be the main focus. So it's almost like every one of his albums is kind of like a spoken word album, because the way, well, I mean, I only say that because of the beat being so bare bones, typically, or at least bare bones sounding. Ka's rapping obviously is not like spoken word because it's more rap and there is a beat to it. But regardless, Ka is one of those people who can definitely bring a cold sounding album. And I mean, other than the beats, his lyrics are just very cold in general. Like the bluntness and just the sheer, like, oh my God, I can't believe you said that to someone, or you're saying that about someone sort of aspect to it. All right. that was the last example that I had. However, like I mentioned, there are more than likely way many more than the 6 or 7 that I've mentioned. So let me know in the comments below what sort of albums you guys listen to during the winter, because like I said, there's probably a lot more, and I'm always down to listen to new music, especially in the winter time, because I just got more time to listen to music somehow. Anyways, like and subscribe if you want to see more content and podcasts like this one. There's also the audio form if you haven't seen it, and if you've watching it, or if you listen to the audio, there's also the video form on YouTube. I feel like I should have said that a long time ago, but I'm hoping you guys know. If not, here's your announcement. Anyways, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and please stay safe out there.